It was thought that we were strange. It goes without saying that we did not consider ourselves to be such. The remainder of the universe was the one that was completely insane. In other words, who would have believed that planets that had liquid water might have been capable of supporting life? Water in liquid form. Considering that you are already doing it, you might as well go swimming in liquid nitrogen. So there we were, animals made of silicon living in a universe made of carbon. There was only one reason that anyone would talk to us, and that was because we could build their star drives at a cost that was 1/100th of this. It is likely that this is the reason why they behaved in even the tiniest amount civil. However, even in that case, it was clear that they were only interested in getting rid of you as quickly as possible. In order to avoid any kind of company, we chose to spend as much time as possible amongst ourselves. We are sociable beings, just like the majority of other sapiens, and we would have appreciated the opportunity to get to know these unusual and chilly individuals. However, it appears that their hearts were just as cold as their environments. Since the moment we joined a system in which we were taught that we should leave unless we had something to offer, we were informed that their environments could not be changed to meet our requirements. We were told that we should leave. We were not bothered by it at first. We told them that we had our own techniques of correcting for the enormous gap in comfort zones, and that if they would kindly provide us or sell us a location that was somewhat isolated for the purpose of the installation, we would be able to take care of it. After that, other justifications were offered. In the event that we allowed one of your generators to be on the surface and one of them malfunctioned, it would be a catastrophe. Your generators have an excessive amount of energy. According to the models that we did, the situation would not be any more catastrophic than if one of yours exploded. Still, it's not worth the risk. We do not have any available space for you. How about the desert over there? We don't have any locations that are completely isolated. And the list goes on and on. Soon after, we realized what was going on and decided to give up, make an effort to establish friends, and settle with making money instead. By the time mankind made its debut on the stage, we had already become accustomed to our position as valuable misfits in the galaxy. Despite the fact that they were more rowdy than most people, they were not too dissimilar from any other species from a psychological standpoint. This was most likely due to the fact that they were still relatively new to the concept of a bigger cosmos and had all the active curiosity of a child. After a century or two, once the astonishment had worn off, we were confident that they would resume their normal behavior. In spite of the fact that we did not receive a great deal of gossip, it became clear to us after some time had passed that these people were not like other people. They continued to explore for the sake of discovery and participate in other activities that were regarded as hedonistic and wasteful by the galactic community. Instead of maturing and taking their position on the cosmic stage, they continued to explore. The humans responded to this attitude with the same level of maturity that they exhibited when they carried themselves. This means that they extended their middle fingers, which, if my memory serves me correctly, is a gesture that conveys a great deal of contempt, and they continued as they had done before. Despite the fact that I have had the opportunity to interact with a few of them, I am of the opinion that they took a certain kind of nefarious delight in spitting in the eye of authority. They stated that we followed our passion to explore and discover in order to arrive at this location. Moreover, now that we are here, you want us to turn around and adopt a mindset that would have kept us confined to this planet until the sun exploded. Yes, I'm sorry. In other words, I've never been very good at remembering speeches, or something along those lines. Even if it were merely due to the fact that their starship's engines needed to be replaced and we had already controlled that market for a considerable amount of time, it was inevitable that we would run into each other. With the benefit of hindsight, we should not have been nearly as startled that everything transpired in the manner that it did. They were aware of us and had been cautioned to stay away, but when you need an engine, you need an engine, and that is how I found myself in front of a video screen with a human being. The appearance of these organisms was peculiar, but at least they were vertically symmetrical. This is true of all carbon-based life. It would appear that the human perceived my appearance to be much more peculiar than it was to me. It jumped out of its chair, and if I was interpreting the tone correctly, it was uttering a violent curse while at the same time calling upon a deity. Every participant in the conversation was muted in accordance with the procedure that had been set, and the translators were the only ones who could transmit audio. On the other hand, I did not require a direct line to be able to determine that the human was yelling at its people. To what goal, however, I could only speculate because the only noun that it was using was one that could not be translated. Within a span of less than 10 minutes, there were nearly 20 people gathered around the television, and each and every one of them made reference to me by using the term that cannot be translated. In a hurry, I attempted to seek it up in the wider interspecies dictionary, however, I was unable to locate it in any of the accessible versions, and the Dictionary of Human Languages was pathetically lacking in its coverage of the subject matter. It seems likely that it is a word that is unique to humans. At some point, they were able to calm down, and the person who had been assigned to communication communicated. I am sorry for that to happen. You caught me off surprise by your look. The tone of the human being was significantly more courteous than any other tone I had ever heard. We do not take offense. You happen to be looking for a replacement component for your engine, right? Oh, you are correct. We wanted to repair our alpha catalyzing ring before it was too far gone because it is corroding and we wanted to prevent more damage. That note of respect is still present. It's so bizarre. It is comprehended. Is it more convenient for you to install it yourself, or would you rather have us do it for you? There was a slight upward twitch on one side of the human's mouth. You probably have a better understanding of what needs to be done than we do. If you are willing to put it in place, that would be wonderful. It was then that the other human began to mumble. To my exasperation, I could only speculate, but it appeared to be the case. Regarding how incredible it was that an untranslatable would be working on the ship, I came dangerously close to breaking protocol when I inquired about the meaning of the word that they kept using. At the very last second, however, my mind caught up with my mouth, and I ended up putting the finishing touches on the timeline for the repair instead. For the most part, the repair was successful. Following determining that their alpha ring had suffered severe corrosion and was in danger of blowing out following their subsequent leap, we decided to replace it and then send them on their way. I found their demeanor to be somewhat perplexing, but I decided to put it out of my mind as an aberration that I would investigate at a later time. After only a year had passed, the next human ship appeared in our yard and began its journey. After returning to communications, I found myself in a state of profound conflict between adhering to the established routine and pursuing my curiosity about what they saw when they looked at me. It appeared as though the eyes of the big guy were expanding to double their normal size as it peered at me. Certainly, if Jose wasn't being truthful, then I'd be damned. There are some things in the universe that cannot be translated. The habit was firmly established, and I inquired about the reason for their visit. It was a straightforward fix, so straightforward that I was fairly persuaded that they had purposefully sought out our shipyard in order to prove whatever it was that they had come to believe. There was not much time that passed before we started receiving human ships on a pretty consistent basis. It was almost unheard of for us to stop at one of our yards unless it was absolutely necessary, despite the fact that we were actually not too far off the popular path. It was only natural for some of us to start having suspicions that either humans were up to something or that one of the other civilizations had put them up to something. The specifics of what they were doing depended on who was narrating the story, but each individual always had a different plan in mind. For the most part, I chose to disregard the half-schizophrenic ramblings of the rumor mill. Instead, I focused my attention on researching as much as I could about human culture and history. I was trying to find the word that they kept using to describe us, but I had very little success. I was able to become competent in their French language, despite the fact that, due to the physiological differences between our lips, it was quite difficult for me to pronounce anything proper. Those fleshy flaps that are located in front of their teeth appeared to play a significant part in each and every one of their languages. In addition, I believe that lips like this make meaningful discourse more difficult than it is worth. That I had the guts to ask for a definition earlier is something I really wish I had done. The subsequent events would have been much easier to comprehend if it had been done. An outpouring of panic broke out in the yard as soon as the human ambassador appeared. It was previously unheard of for a species to have regular touch with an organism like humans. It was on the verge of being a fever dream to the point of being completely impossible to imagine that someone would actually send someone to talk to them. It was only logical that I would be selected to be the one to greet the ambassador because, at that point in time, I was the individual who had the greatest expertise in dealing with them. I gulp. The most significant worry that I had was that the pressure would cause my stutter to become more noticeable. I remember this very clearly. In the event that that occurred, I was reasonably certain that I would pass away from embarrassment. The human being was dressed in a suit that was designed to protect the environment, and because it was so cumbersome, I was unable to determine whether the ambassador was a male or a female given the circumstances. In the event that I used the incorrect pronoun, I hoped that they would not take offense. The post of ambassador was one that we had personally abandoned a long time ago. There was not a single person who was willing to come within a few miles of any of us, and because of their lack of collaboration, the only thing that any other human being saw of us was a video screen conference, which was already an unusual occurrence. With the majority of people preferring to communicate solely through text, it is easier to overlook our existence. Consequently, there I was, selected to be a representation of our race or at the very least of our yard, which happened to be the largest of its type. When I think back on it, I realize that this is probably the reason why the humans communicated with each other there. They, like the majority of others, place a significant amount of importance on the size of anything. The assumption that something enormous must be significant is based on the fact that more work is required to sustain something that is large. Large objects are something that we consider to be a necessary pain in the rear, and we would rather have a few items that are modestly sized than a few large ones, provided that all other factors remain the same. There is a proverb that is used in their common language that is about eggs and baskets, and it is a reference to that kind of circumstance. However, I am unable to recall the specific word. As a result of my hazy familiarity with their motions, I was able to recognize and respond appropriately when the human dressed in a suit cocked its head toward me. "You have arrived at the Hisok yard. I would want to introduce myself as Kaxi, and if it is not too much trouble, I would be honored to join you." "Without a doubt," the human responded. "It is imperative that we begin our conversation as soon as possible because there is a great deal that has to be covered." Although I sincerely hope that I was merely misinterpreting a harmless comment in the most negative way possible, I found that my stomach began to tighten up uneasily. "So, could you kindly come this way?" I started walking in the direction of the room that had been reserved specifically for the purpose of holding this conference. As soon as the human had found a comfortable position on the bench that had been modified to accommodate its shape, I inquired about the reason for its visit. The human being stated that, to tell you the truth, we are a little uncertain ourselves. This world in our solar system has a climate that is almost perfect for you, but we can't just give things away for free, especially something as large as a planet. See, we have a planet in our solar system that is just about perfect for you. And the fact that you would be so close to our home planet is something that makes those who work in the military nervous. On the other hand, the rest of us believe that the fact that everyone refers to you as the untranslatable equivalent of monsters of the universe does not necessarily indicate that this is the case. We are willing to give you a chance, particularly in light of the fact that you have not exhibited any violent conduct. While I was staring at the guy for a considerable amount of time, I was confident that this was some type of strange prank. "Please excuse me, but would you mind repeating that statement? To me, it seems as though you are providing us with a planet." My voice was stuttering, but I was so traumatized that I didn't really care. In the human's tone, there was a distinct sense of enjoyment that arrived. "In a sense, it is absolutely inhospitable for us, but someone did some crunching of the statistics for the hell of it, and it turns out that it is rather comparable to the one you came from. In the event that we are unable to make use of it, but another individual is able to, those of us who have more progressive mindsets came to the conclusion that we might as well try to come to some type of arrangement with them." I must have been staring at them like an idiot for what seemed like a few minutes while I sat there watching them. "I'm here primarily to determine whether or not you are interested in the concept as a whole," the person stated, not in an unfriendly manner. "The official agreement will most likely be hammered out over the course of several weeks or months, even if all goes according to plan." For whatever reason, it appeared to be making fun of this. The human being reached out with its upper limb and waved it in front of my front eyes, which makes me believe that something in my brain must have had a short circuit. "Hey, Kishi, how are you doing?" The twitching was so intense that I almost turned over onto my back. "You alone, you alone, you alone." My tongue was clenched until I was able to communicate in a manner that was understandable. "I am doing okay. There was a little gap during which I took a number of deep breaths and attempted to organize my thoughts in some fashion. Despite the fact that I am unable to speak for everyone and do not have the authority to provide you with any type of official, I do not believe that our leadership would be in any way opposed to the notion. Its tone conveyed a sense of both excitement and satisfaction from my response. I am going to explain it to my bosses. When we are on the next ship, we will send a message to let you know where and when we may meet up. In addition to wishing it well on its voyage back home, I nodded, which was another human gesture that I had learnt. After that, I remained fixed to the bench that the person had been sitting on when we were having our talk. Our first colony, which was a colony. We might end up with a real colony on a real planet rather than a collection of ships that are connected together and roaming around. It is hard to believe that there were planets that humanity could inhabit without having to resort to radical and expensive terraforming techniques. Furthermore, every solar system that included such planets was already inhabited and hence hostile. To our surprise, someone was willing to let us in at this moment. When I noticed that I was hyperventilating, I went to grab a refreshing beverage for myself. The long and short of it is that it took approximately 7 years of discussions, in no little part because we were really skeptical about the sincerity of their goal, and the other races were making a significant amount of noise about how the humans would be regretting joining themselves with such abnormal beings. At the end of the day, however, we were able to reach a set of concessions that were beneficial to both of us. Venus is the planet that we have. As one irritable diplomat put it, we were free to do whatever we wanted with it. We could terraform it, blow it up, or throw it into the sun. The only thing we should be careful about is not crashing it into Earth. Each of us who lived there and did not fall into poverty would be required to pay a 1% tax to the Terran government. In exchange, our yards would produce or repair 500,000 tons worth of ship, which would be equivalent to 15 medium-sized freighters, 3 large warships, or approximately half of the repairs that their navy required. In addition, one of the delegates stated that it is highly likely that we will wind up paying you for the other half. They did in fact. Venus was not even close to being a paradise, it was so hot that even we could not stand it, and the day and night were outrageously lengthy. After that, however, we increased the amount of nitrogen that was present in the atmosphere by over 10% and made adjustments to the proportions of some of the gases that are less frequent. It cooled down to the point where the temperature was fairly pleasant, and the atmosphere was even more dense than the one we were accustomed to, but it was not so dense that it made it impossible to breathe. Because of the larger nitrogen content, breathing was really easier because you didn't have to exert as much effort to get air. This was the case because respiration was easier. It goes without saying that this was not even the finest part because the air was so dense that we were able to fly. Although we were able to glide very smoothly, our wings were not big enough to support us when we were trying to return home. On Venus, we were able to get into the air with a running start and maintain our position until we became too exhausted to continue flapping our flapping wings. The process of determining how long that was also resulted in me sustaining some fairly stunning bruises. I don't feel any regret about it at all. It was a breathtaking experience. A cosmos that regarded our sort as freaks of nature was separated from us by humanity, which served as a buffer between us and that universe. We fostered their love of exploration and learning for the sake of discovering intriguing things. The collaboration was as close to perfect as one could hope for in a romantic relationship. We would construct, and they would develop, and by doing so, we would both profit. Due to the fact that their asteroid belt included an extraordinary abundance of metals and rare earth elements, we were able to acquire an abundance of raw material that beyond our expectations. For a very long time, humanity had made the decision to adopt a policy of finders keepers in relation to extraterrestrial resources. It was the property of anyone was able to get their hands on it, provided that it was not in orbit around the Earth or that it did not contain mining drones. When we took possession of an asteroid that was supposed to be the final destination for a group of droids, we experienced a problem. But because humans had failed to warn us that they couldn't do much more than grumble and tell us to make sure that they hadn't designated our next target for operations, we got quite close to one another in a figurative sense. They were able to find and colonize 2 other planets with our assistance, and they returned the favor by assisting us in locating and adapting another hell planet, which they humorously referred to as our candidates for colonization. Due to the fact that I was so preoccupied with the conversations, as well as organizing the terraforming and planning and carrying out the release of flora and fauna, it took me another 2 years before I finally remembered to inquire about the untranslatable word that they had used in the beginning. It is difficult to fathom how surprised I was when I found out that it was the name of a creature that was mentioned in their mythology. Depending on who was narrating the story, they were either guardians or tyrants who hoarded treasure and guarded the wisdom that was beyond comprehension. They frequently ruled over the powers of the elements and were always powerful beyond any measure. There are dragons. To say that I found the analogy to be unpleasant would be an understatement. I guessed, and I must admit that I was correct in my assumption, that this was a significant part in their first sentiments about us. Naturally, our calm and businesslike demeanor only served to confirm their preconceived notions that the other races who had informed them about us might have been motivated more by fear than by any actual facts. The others were willing to deal with them, albeit with a degree of distaste for their alliance with us, which was sufficient for them to have to fight for concessions that they could have gotten without any effort in the past. They had not adopted the blatant racism that the rest of the sapient species had adopted, and they had distanced themselves from the majority of the galactic community. This was not nearly as much as it was for us. Although our alliance with the humans provided us with a significant degree of protection from the hostility of the rest of the universe, we were still required to engage in conversation with them. This was due to the fact that, despite the fact that we were the most skilled shipbuilders, there were other aspects, such as medical procedures and internet service, that required assistance from outside sources. Regarding technological advancement, humanity was still a significant distance behind the curve. Even while they wanted to assist us, there were times when they were unable to do so for the simple reason that they lacked the knowledge necessary to construct the instruments that would be necessary to produce what we required. Despite this, the relative technological advantage was slowly but surely disappearing with our relatively minor aid. I, along with the rest of us, did not anticipate that the situation would result in advancements in environmental protection. This is something that I did not anticipate happening. In the first place, it would appear that people are naturally inquisitive. They want to know what, how, and why it is happening. They notice something peculiar, and the first thing they do is probe at it that they have noticed. When it comes to us, it would be referring to us. They had never theorized that anything even quite like to us existed, at least not outside of the realm of fiction. On the other hand, researching humans was challenging to say the least, considering that if they ever removed their suits, they would simultaneously suffocate and fry all at the same time. Therefore, they invested a significant amount of time and resources into the development of environment suits that were less bulky while yet being able to withstand the relatively high temperatures and pressures that we required. In less than 20 years, or roughly 10 years for you humans, they had gone from suits that resembled the ones that they had initially taken to the moon to something that was about as bulky as a thick jacket. This transformation took place in one short period of time. How can I tell what their personality is like? As it turns out, these suits of theirs are just as effective at retaining heat and air as they are at letting them out. All it takes is a few adjustments. Allow me to explain. In the event that you are able to get past the fact that it is so cold that it may practically freeze you to the bone in a matter of minutes. This planet has some pretty incredible things to offer. For all the world, they have this animal that appears to be animated. It appears as though someone has glued together pieces of a rainbow and animated it. A few of them even congregate in enormous swarms in order to migrate. The trees were completely covered in them, and I was fortunate enough to be in the right position at the appropriate time of year to witness this magnificent sight. According to the tour guide, there have been instances in which branches have broken under their combined weight, which is implausible given that each branch could not possibly weigh more than a gram or two. Naturally, this resulted in the creation of a wide variety of tourism opportunities. The fact that people appear to take pleasure in the opportunity to spend their earnings on trinkets and knickknacks is yet another characteristic of the species. When I spoke about it with Lee, the ambassador whose name I had neglected to inquire about when we first saw each other, she simply chuckled and stated that humans do not construct hoards in the same way that dragons do. It would have been possible for me to stick my tunku out at her if it hadn't meant that she would have slobbered on my faceplate. Not only does something have the same significance for us, but it also has the same significance for humans. However, life is not always easy, and it would appear that the universe has chosen to send a few storms our way with the intention of making our lives more difficult. The human race continued to make the occasional effort to discover more cost-effective methods of constructing star vehicles. Despite the fact that it was unsuccessful, the most recent project did result in the concept of some innovative concepts and resulted in an increase of 10% in the drive's efficiency and 7% in its speed. Without a doubt, if you tell them that something is impossible, they will continue to struggle with it until they find a solution that benefits them. Our engineers were having a talk with a pair of human engineers when the conversation went into cost analysis, and the humans dropped a bomb on us. As far as anyone can tell, this conversation was quite interesting. It has come to our attention that the expense of manufacturing a drive in an atmosphere similar to that of Earth is not 10 times as much as it is for us. According to what we had been told by the other species, the price was 4 times more, but it was only 3 times higher if you had a convenient source of ore, such as an asteroid belt that was abundant in rare earth elements. Over the course of the previous 1400 years, we had been essentially sharing star drives with one another. Allow me to tell you that if there was ever anything that could cause the Senate to go into a frenzy, it would be the revelation that we had been undercharging our primary source of revenue by 60%. In addition, humanity was not very pleased when they learned about it, although their anger was fairly evenly distributed between the fact that they would have to pay more for their drives and the fact that the situation was unfair. Indeed, they agreed, if with some reluctance, to pay the appropriate amount for their drives from that point forward as soon as they acquired this information. To be sure, it was a minor solace, but it was one that we would never forget. After the entire problem was resolved, the Senate made the decision to only charge them 70% of the total fee as a sign of their goodwill toward them. My hypothesis is that those in authority wanted to make sure that we maintained a positive relationship with our one and only allies. When we decided to raise our pricing, we anticipated that there would be some pushback, but the commotion that it caused was astonishing. As the Maharet were on the point of launching war on us, the Turk and the Rihuanu were not far behind in their pursuit of revenge. Apparently, we were expected to sit there and take it like a nice little wage slave. We were meant to do things like that. Please understand that although we may not enjoy fighting, we are not going to tolerate being taken advantage of at every single opportunity. There were a few narcissists who wanted to give them a few nuclear weapons and test how they would react to them, but happily, common sense ended up winning out. We let them know that we had made major enhancements to the architecture of the drive, and if they did not back down, they would be able to say goodbye to any possibility of obtaining these new drives. That put an end to the incessant noise. There is no doubt that a few of the aforementioned jerks did, in fact, accomplish something. Their proposal to keep the most improved models in the local market and sell models with half the efficiency and speed enhancements was accepted by the Senate, which made the decision to go with their plan. It was reassuring to know that we had a modest but considerable concealed edge in the event that we ever required it, despite the fact that 5 and 3.5% is a significant improvement over the previous model. Honestly, I pray that we will never do it. A little over 40 years had passed since the first time we had come into contact with human beings. In other words, Terran years. 50 years have passed since we first began keeping track of the number of Venusian years. Naturally, the fact that they were kept in the same location meant that the humans also received the completely enhanced drives. Although there was a lot of grumbling that the price of the upgrades was way too costly, our partnership with them was as strong as it had ever been, and the fact that the new drives had such big increases over the old model helped to ease the pain that they were experiencing in their wallets. It should come as no surprise that the fact that such technological leaps had been accomplished served merely to encourage humanity to proceed with their studies. I found it really intriguing to observe how they appeared to emerge from the shadows in order to work on the most recent industry phenomenon. As a result of the new environment suits, we were able to visit each other's laboratories, which allowed our collaborative study to truly get off the ground. I was completely joking around. It is very much appreciated. We had never had the opportunity to have someone who literally saw the world differently read over our notes, and I have to say that they filled in some gaps and expanded on some areas that we had never thought of before. After that, we would go through their notes and proceed with the same process. When it comes to the number of iterations that are required before both parties run out of ideas, it is simply remarkable. In the 20 years that we had been working together diligently, there had been no less than 5 significant advancements in the field of drive technology, 2 in the field of armament, 6 in the field of neurology, 2 applied to humans, and 4 to us, and 8 fucking teens in the field of medical science. With all due respect, I apologize for my obscenity, but the emphasis is very important. There is also a genuine anti-aging technology that has the potential to increase human lifespan by more than 40%. At the time, I pondered if or not this is precisely how the beginning of a golden age would feel. All right. For the most part, I don't believe that a coalition like ours has ever existed before. On the other hand, humans had a tendency to disregard the way things were done, and we were just delighted to have the company of other species. The majority of species tend to stay to themselves and would never invite another race into their laboratories. My age allowed me to have the anti-aging treatment known as prolong, which meant that I was going to stay around for a considerable amount of time. However, even if it had not been for it, I would have been able to witness the gradual transformation of the universe around us. Over the course of time, the 2 of us were able to slowly catch up to the Ruano, who were usually regarded as the most technologically sophisticated culture among the races that traveled through space. We had gone from being a race of pariahs to a cherished ally in a span of time that was less than half of a lifetime. This was a curious development. The time when I was a lowly communications tech, chatting over text-only channels about starship repairs to those who would prefer I didn't exist, is so far from my memory that I can hardly recall it. To put it simply, life goes on. And then it took place. Star drives have reached their pinnacle of development. Throughout the entirety of the existence of FTL, there has always been a limit. The name that is given to it vary. But it is common knowledge that if a starship emerges from fast-traveling light, FTL, too close to a planet, the planet will be obliterated if it is fortunate, and if it is not, it will be torn apart. The high cost of terraforming can be attributed to this limitation. Getting anywhere in sublight takes an eternity, and transporting a massive amount of atmosphere accelerates the process even further. This is due to the fact that the energy requirements for sublight and the maximum speed are dependent on mass, and compressed air is not significantly lighter than its counterpart in water. The following is the procedure that must be followed in order to terraform a planet. You will emerge from fast-traveling light at a considerable distance from the planet that is the source of your atmosphere, which is typically a gas giant. Spend a couple of weeks traveling at a speed that is sublight to reach the planet in question. The gases that you intend to use should be filtered out and then compressed into tanks. Several more weeks are required to finish filling up the hold. You should spend 2 or 3 months going far enough away from the gas giant so that you do not blow it up. When you enter FTL, you will spend another brief eternity transporting the atmosphere that you have harvested to the rock that you choose to reside on. This process should be repeated several hundred times with a dozen ships. Nevertheless, there was no limit at this point, at least not for us. With the help of these new drives, a ship was able to leave the fast-forwarding, FTL, mode nearly on top of a planet. When the unfortunate pilot made a mistake when entering his coordinates, he realized that it would be alright even if you only skimmed the atmosphere on the exit. This fact was found by the pilot, for the most part, because of shock. I do not hold him responsible. As soon as I found out the results of the alpha test, I felt like my legs were going to collapse under me. Now, rather than spending decades and billions or trillions of dollars hauling air and water to make a planet livable or finding one that already had an atmosphere and hydrosphere, which is easier said than done, which doesn't even touch on the time and money needed to seed the planet with flora and fauna, we can find a planet that already has both of these things. Currently, it was feasible to get a planet ready for the initial stages of seeding in a period of time that was less than 10 Venusian years or 6 Terran years. This is not to mention the fact that the time required for regular shipping and interstellar travel would be a fraction of what it would be otherwise. That meeting left me feeling as though my mind was whirling. There was a virtually infinite number of alternatives. Not only would we be able to create paradises out of deserts in the blink of an eye, but we would also be able to dominate all shipping and travel. I had no idea what was going to take place once word got out about the possibility, which was really mind-boggling. To put it another way, these advancements were light years ahead of anything that any other species could have accomplished. After that, I went to fetch a stiff drink for myself. At the end of the day, we came to the conclusion that these new drives should be treated as a trade secret and that they should not be sold to anyone, at least not until someone else independently produced them. They came with a significant benefit. I won't dispute that there was a certain degree of spiteful satisfaction in being in the position to get a bit back from people who had robbed us for more than a millennium. In addition, I won't deny that there was a certain amount of vindictive delight. Despite the fact that we might have added a few unneeded fees for species that had been particularly unpleasant to us in the past, we have, for the most part, avoided the desire to make them pay through the nose. Despite the fact that the humans were muttering about the incalculable military benefits, we kept our foot on the ground. It does not matter how many bells and whistles you connect to your ships, if you are attempting to conquer a race that is well established and their buddies are attempting to beat you to a pulp, you will not be successful. On the other hand, if you are able to provide them with something that they actually desire, you will be able to enjoy all of the advantages of having a vessel without experiencing any of the difficulties. It is an infinitely greater rarity to find planets that have a breathable atmosphere and water than it is to find barren rocks. If someone were to be able to transform those barren rocks into habitable worlds in a fraction of the time that took any other species, they would be able to do so. The fees that such a service could command are extremely close to being indefinite, and that is not even taking into consideration the implications that it would have for interplanetary traveling and shipping. Taking into consideration all of the possibilities was intoxicating. To our ill-concealed delight, our other intelligent races were completely and utterly cheated out of their benefits. They have two options: either they could terraform their planets in the conventional manner and wait 20 to 50 years, in addition to the same amount of time for seeding flora and fauna, or they could pay us half the money and obtain a planet that is habitable in half the time, even taking into account the amount of time that is spent seeding the planet with life. We were approached by anyone who had two brain cells to rub together, regardless of how little they liked us. We had the rest of the universe by the balls, and it felt so good. This was especially true for old-timers like myself who remembered a time when we were not friends with anyone because everyone only saw us as freaks of nature. The only thing that prevented them from killing us all out of sheer reactionary disgust was the fact that we were useful as a race that had been duped into paid slavery. A hearty swallow of my drink was taken by me in the hope that the pins and needles would divert my attention away from the negative direction that my thoughts had taken. When did I become a geyser that was always thinking back on the past? But then, doesn't it happen that ultimately everyone becomes a geyser who is thinking back on the past? Now that I had finished my drink, I paid the bill. Tomorrow was going to be yet another exceptionally long day. The Tamir had approached the newly established terraforming requisition board with discussions over the possibility of entering up a contract for the terraforming of 10 worlds or more. And taking into consideration the fact that they have been really kind to us in the past, in addition to the fact that they are extremely congested and destitute, we might just give them a break. All right. I have to admit that it appeared as though the rest of my life was going to be a lot of fun.